terrifying real-life home alone encounters. Being home alone can be a peaceful retreat, a time to relax and enjoy solitude. But sometimes, being alone can become a nightmare you never saw coming. These 3 true stories of people who experienced the horrifying side of solitude will leave you questioning what really lurks in the shadows when you're by yourself. Story 1. The Shadow in the Window. A few years ago, Sarah, a 29-year-old graphic designer, found herself excited yet anxious about moving into her very first apartment in the quiet suburbs of Chicago. It was a cozy, 1-bedroom unit, tucked away on a peaceful street, far from the noise and rush of the city. After years of living with roommates and the constant hustle of shared spaces, she relished the thought of finally having a space all to herself. Her new home felt like a sanctuary, a retreat after long, exhausting days filled with endless meetings and client deadlines. Sarah would often spend her evenings curling up on the couch with a good book or binge-watching her favorite shows. There was something incredibly comforting about the stillness, the way the world outside seemed to pause when she was in her apartment, or so she thought. One particular night, after an especially grueling day at work, Sarah was ready to wind down early. She'd made her usual routine of checking the locks on every window and door, something she'd grown accustomed to, living in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The last thing she wanted was to feel vulnerable in a new place. After a quick dinner and a few chapters of her book, she drifted off to sleep, the quiet of her apartment wrapping around her like a protective cocoon. But her peace didn't last long. It started with a loud thud that echoed through the apartment, shattering the silence of the night. It came from the living room. Her body stiffened, heart racing as the adrenaline surged through her veins. She lay there for a moment, trying to make sense of what she had heard. Maybe it was just the wind, the creaking of the old apartment settling, she told herself. Still, the thud reverberated in her chest, too clear and distinct to ignore. She grabbed her phone, ready to call for help if needed, her fingers trembling as she unlocked it. The silence was suffocating, the kind of silence that amplifies every small noise. She checked the door, locked, the windows, secure. But as Sarah walked through her small apartment, a sense of unease settled over her like a heavy weight. She tried to shake it off. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, half believing it. But still, her feet felt frozen, hesitant as she moved through the apartment. She passed the kitchen, the hallway, and came to the living room. Everything seemed in place, but something didn't feel right. Then she saw it. The living room window. The curtain swayed gently, as if someone had just brushed past it. But there was no breeze, no open window. The apartment was completely still. And there, beyond the glass, was a shadow, tall, thin, and unmistakable. It glided past the window, as if it were moving just outside, casting a dark figure across the dimly lit room. Sarah froze. Her breath caught in her throat as her mind raced for an explanation. Could it be a neighbor, just walking by, or something worse? Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that made it impossible to think clearly. She quickly texted her best friend Jenna, asking if she could see any lights from the street below. It was a simple question, one Sarah hoped would offer a logical answer. But the reply was chilling, more unsettling than she could have imagined. "Nope, it's pitch black." Suddenly, Sarah felt a chill creep down her spine. There was no one out there, no lights, nothing but the oppressive darkness. Her legs felt heavy, but she forced herself to move closer to the window. Slowly, she pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but her body was tense, almost paralyzed with fear. She saw nothing. The street was empty, silent, but still her gut told her something was wrong. And then it happened. A soft tap. Not a knock, but a tap. A faint sound that made her stomach flip. It came from the window. She jerked back, heart thundering in her chest. Was someone out there? Her mind screamed for her to run, to hide, but she stayed rooted in place, paralyzed by the thought of what could be lurking just outside. She grabbed her phone again, her fingers fumbling as she quickly dialed 911, her voice shaking as she whispered into the receiver. I think someone's outside my apartment. I saw a shadow, and now there's a tap on the window. Please help. The operator tried to calm her down, assuring her that help was on the way. In the meantime, Sarah locked herself in her bedroom, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she waited, each sound outside making her flinch. When the police finally arrived, they were quick to search the area. They checked the street, the alley, and even the parking lot, but found nothing, no signs of anyone lurking nearby. They asked Sarah to describe the shadow she saw, and after a brief moment of silence, one of the officers spoke. It's probably just the reflection of the streetlights, ma'am, he said with a reassuring smile. Trees sometimes cast strange shadows on windows, especially in older buildings like this one. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She couldn't shake the image of that tall, dark figure moving across her window. No, this felt different. This was something real. The officers left after a thorough search, their footsteps fading down the hallway as Sarah stood frozen in her bedroom, the phone still in her hand. She knew, deep down, that she wasn't imagining things. Something had been outside. But what? And why? The next few days passed in a haze. Sarah tried to continue with her daily routine, but the unsettling feeling never left. Each time she passed the living room window, her heart would race, as if expecting to see the shadow again. Her eyes would scan the street below, searching the darkness for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Then, one evening, after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. The lock was still secure, but the door had been opened, just enough to make her heart skip a beat. She stepped inside cautiously, the familiar scent of her home suddenly feeling alien. As she walked through the living room, her eyes instinctively went to the window, and there it was again, the shadow. It moved across the window, swift and sure, as though it had been waiting for her. Sarah's blood ran cold. She couldn't breathe. She rushed to the door, ready to bolt out of the apartment. But before she could turn the knob, she heard a soft voice, no louder than a whisper, calling her name. Sarah. She spun around, her eyes darting across the empty room. The voice was gone, but it lingered in her mind, curling around her thoughts like a dark cloud. In that moment, Sarah realized that her apartment, her safe haven, had never been as peaceful as she had thought. It wasn't just the shadow outside her window that haunted her. It was the knowledge that something had been there, waiting, watching, and it wasn't going away. The police came again, but this time, they couldn't explain it away. The building had been thoroughly searched, and no signs of an intruder were found. The shadow, they said, might have been a trick of the light. But Sarah knew better. She knew that whatever it was not done with her yet. Every night, as she lay in bed, waiting for sleep to claim her, she felt it. Those eyes, those unseen eyes, watching her from beyond the glass. And each time she passed that window, she couldn't help but wonder, what if the shadow was more than just a shadow? What if it was something waiting for her, just outside the glass? Story 2. The Uninvited Guest in the Basement. When Tyler, a 24-year-old college student, moved into an old house in the quiet town of Pennsylvania, he felt a mix of excitement and relief. The house, large and worn with age, had a certain charm that made it feel welcoming, as though it had stories of its own to tell. For Tyler, it was the perfect place to escape the bustling campus life and to finally enjoy the privacy he had longed for. The spacious rooms, and the old hardwood floors gave the house character, even if it creaked and groaned with time. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. The real gem of the house was the basement, a large, unfinished space that Tyler converted into his personal haven, a place where he could unwind after long days of studying, hanging out with friends, and most importantly, playing video games in peace. The weekends were his time to relax, and Tyler often invited friends over for movie nights. On one particular Friday evening, after a few beers and some pizza, Tyler's friends decided to watch a movie in the living room, their laughter echoing up and down the hall. Tyler, feeling the weight of the alcohol settle in, decided to head downstairs to grab another drink from the fridge he'd set up in the basement. It was a ritual for him, an excuse to take a breather and enjoy the quiet of his sanctuary. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the air in the basement felt cooler than usual. He stepped down, the familiar wooden steps creaking under his weight, and instantly he was hit with the smell of old wood and dust. Tyler moved toward the fridge, but something stopped him. He paused, his senses heightened as he heard a sound, a soft, deliberate thud, coming from somewhere in the far corner of the basement. He froze, his body tensing. But there was no one down here. His friends were upstairs. Tyler had the basement to himself, and yet the noise continued. Another soft sound followed. Footsteps, but not just any footsteps. These were too deliberate, too close. Tyler's pulse quickened, and a strange unease crept up his spine. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. The house was old. It creaked and groaned all the time. The sounds of an old house settling, right? He shook his head, trying to rationalize it. But as he turned his attention back to the fridge, there was no mistaking it. The footsteps continued, now coming from the far corner of the basement, somewhere in the shadows beyond the cluttered shelves and old furniture. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. His heart began to race as he slowly turned around, his eyes scanning the darkness. There, in the corner, nothing. He felt his body tense as his thoughts ran wild. Maybe it was one of his friends playing a prank on him. They had to be upstairs, he thought. Maybe they were sneaking down to mess with him. Tyler let out a nervous laugh and called out, "Very funny, guys. Come on out." But there was no response. Silence. The footsteps ceased, leaving only the heavy thudding of his own heartbeat in his ears. Tyler tried to brush it off, but the unease clung to him like a second skin. The chill in the air intensified, creeping down his spine. Just as he began to question whether he had imagined it all, the door at the top of the stairs suddenly creaked open. Tyler spun around, expecting to see one of his friends walking down with a mischievous grin on their face, but there was only darkness. No one stood at the top of the stairs. His stomach dropped, a cold, unsettling feeling settling in. He had locked that door earlier. He always locked it. Why was it open now? Tyler hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. He slowly began to ascend the stairs, the weight of each step seeming heavier than the last. His legs felt like lead as he climbed, unwilling to look back, but somehow knowing that whatever was down there would follow him. The basement door creaked closed behind him, and as it slammed shut with an almost unnatural force, Tyler jumped, his heart skipping a beat. His mind raced, but there was nothing to explain the dread that washed over him. The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversation and laughter, but the nagging sensation of being watched lingered over him like a dark cloud. Every time Tyler glanced toward the stairs, his thoughts returned to the basement. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there, waiting in the shadows. When he finally went to bed that night, the sounds of the house settling kept him awake. Every creak of the floorboards, every snap of the old beams made him jump. He didn't dare go back downstairs, not yet. The next day, Tyler awoke to a sense of unease that refused to leave him. When he ventured downstairs to grab a snack from the kitchen, his eyes were drawn to the basement door. He had locked it the night before, he was sure of it. But now, it stood wide open. His breath caught in his throat as he walked toward it. How could this have happened? He had locked it. He always locked it. Tyler's hands trembled as he approached the door, his thoughts running wild. He had been alone the night before. His friends had stayed upstairs the whole time. He could hear their voices from the living room, laughing, joking, completely oblivious to whatever had happened in the basement. But this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just his imagination. Something or someone had been in the basement with him the night before. He slowly approached the open door, the air in the basement feeling colder than usual. He stood at the threshold, peering into the dim light, but there was nothing there. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if the darkness itself was waiting, watching. Tyler's heart raced as he stepped back, a sickening feeling crawling up his throat. The sensation of being watched never left him. Days passed, but Tyler's mind kept returning to the basement. He couldn't explain what happened, but the fear of being followed, of something lurking just out of sight, gnawed at him. Every time he stepped near the basement, the hairs on the back of his neck would stand on end. And then, on a seemingly normal Saturday morning, it happened again. Tyler was sitting in his living room, scrolling through his phone when he heard it. A soft tapping sound, almost rhythmic, coming from the basement. It wasn't just a random creak or house settling. It was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Tyler's heart skipped a beat as he jumped up, instinctively heading for the stairs. But as soon as he stood at the top, he froze. The door at the bottom of the stairs slowly creaked open on its own. Suddenly, the basement no longer felt like a haven. It felt like a trap. With a deep breath, Tyler ran back to his room, locking the door behind him. He called his friends and asked them to come over. He couldn't stay in the house alone anymore, not with whatever was lurking in the basement. When his friends arrived, Tyler insisted they check the basement with him, but once again, there was nothing, no signs of anyone or anything. The tapping had stopped. The next few weeks were filled with restless nights, filled with the constant feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. Tyler moved out of the house soon after, unable to shake the eerie feeling of being haunted by whatever or whoever had been lurking in the basement that night. He never did find out what had been down there, but every time he looks back, he wonders if the house had been hiding something more sinister. Maybe it wasn't just an old house settling. Maybe something had been waiting all along in the shadows of that forgotten basement, biding its time until it was ready to make itself known. Story 3. The Silent Caller. Amanda, a 32-year-old marketing professional, had always loved her townhouse. Nestled on a quiet street just outside the bustling city, it was her sanctuary. After a long week at work, she would look forward to those peaceful nights when she could unwind alone. Her boyfriend, Matt, had been away on a work trip, leaving her with an entire evening of solitude. She sank into the soft cushions of her couch, a blanket draped over her lap, and curled up with a book she had been meaning to finish. The soft hum of the city outside her window, the occasional passing car, and the distant chatter of nightlife created a comforting atmosphere. Amanda revelled in the stillness of the evening, thinking it would be the perfect night. The quiet of her home, the gentle rustling of the trees outside, and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall made everything feel so normal. But as midnight neared, her sense of peace was shattered by the sudden buzz of her phone. She glanced at the screen, noticing an unfamiliar number. Odd. She had no idea who it could be, but she was expecting a couple of work-related calls, so she answered the phone casually, half expecting it to be a telemarketer or an automated service. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but betraying a slight note of curiosity. At first there was nothing, just a heavy silence. Amanda waited, thinking it might be a bad connection, when suddenly the voice that came through the phone chilled her to the bone. "Amanda!" The voice was hoarse, low, almost raspy, like someone had been whispering in the shadows for far too long. The words sent an icy shiver down her spine, and before she could respond, a wave of dread washed over her. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling, the sensation that someone was watching her, that somehow the voice knew her name. She felt the phone slip from her trembling hand, crashing onto the floor as her heart hammered against her chest. The cold air in the room felt stifling, as though the walls were closing in around her. Her pulse raced, and for a moment Amanda could only stare at the phone on the floor, feeling completely disconnected from everything around her. She quickly picked it back up and dialed Matt's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. Her throat felt tight, her mind racing. Who was this person? Why had they called her? She could feel the weight of fear in the pit of her stomach. Was it someone from her past? A prank? A threat? Amanda got up from the couch, her legs shaky as she moved toward the front door. She checked it. Locked. She moved to the windows, the blinds tightly drawn, each click of the lock sounding unnervingly loud in the silent house. Everything seemed fine, yet she felt anything but safe. The apartment, which had been her haven, now felt oppressive, as though the air itself was charged with something malevolent. She sat back down on the couch, trying to calm herself, but the silence felt deafening now. Her phone buzzed again, and Amanda's heart skipped a beat. It was a text message from the same unknown number. Her hand was still shaking as she opened it. "I'm watching you." The blood drained from her face. Her eyes scanned the room, her heartbeat thumping loudly in her ears. She glanced into the corners of the living room, her eyes darting nervously, but there was nothing there. No movement, no signs of life. The phone message had stirred up something deep inside her, some primal fear she hadn't experienced in years. How could this person know where she was? How could they know her name? Amanda got up again, pacing around the room. She didn't know what to do. The call and the text felt real, yet her rational mind told her it could all be a sick joke. But what if it wasn't? The tapping of her fingers on her phone, the sound of her breath getting shallow, the weight of her growing unease. Nothing felt real anymore. The house she had once felt so safe in now felt like a cage. The night dragged on in an agonizing stretch of time. Amanda couldn't sleep. Every small sound in the house, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, sent her leaping to attention. She checked her phone repeatedly, hoping for some sign that it was all a mistake. But there was no more communication from the mysterious caller. The silence was almost worse than the voice had been. Her eyes never left the phone, waiting for it to buzz again. But it didn't. She was left with the oppressive weight of paranoia pressing on her chest. Had the caller just stopped? Was it a prank gone too far? Why hadn't they called back? What was their intention? But the fear lingered, gnawing at her every time she closed her eyes. She felt like a spectator in her own home, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Days passed, but the feeling didn't subside. Amanda tried to continue with her life. She went to work, met with friends, and tried to act normal. But each time she passed her phone, she could almost feel the weight of it, knowing that a single text or call could ruin her day. It wasn't until nearly a week later that Amanda found out something even more unsettling. She had gone to her car, which was parked in the small driveway behind her townhouse, when she noticed something strange. The door to her garage had been left slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it the night before. She approached cautiously, the back of her neck prickling with the same sensation of being watched. As she walked toward the garage door, she saw it, the unmistakable shape of a piece of paper sticking out from beneath the edge of the door. Amanda's breath caught in her throat as she bent down to retrieve it. The paper was folded neatly, and when she opened it, her hands went cold. The note read, "I know where you live. I've been inside." The words were short, simple, and chilling. There was no signature, no clue as to who had written it, but it confirmed something Amanda had feared. The caller had been closer than she realized. The words on the note made her feel like she was no longer alone in her house, that her sanctuary had been breached, and whoever had been tormenting her knew far more about her life than she had ever imagined. That was the moment the fear became real. The feeling of being watched, the sense that someone was always just around the corner, ready to strike. It all came crashing down on her. Amanda had always thought that her townhouse was her safe space, a place where she could escape from the world. But now, it was the very place where the shadows seemed to be closing in, where every movement, every sound carried with it the threat of something terrible. As the days passed, the calls stopped, but the note had left a lasting impression. Amanda installed cameras around her home, kept the windows locked tight, and took every precaution to ensure she wasn't being watched. But even now, years later, whenever her phone rings late at night, a small part of her still freezes. Who had called that night? How did they know so much about her? And worse, was it someone she knew, or a stranger who had been stalking her all along? The silence of the calls still lingers in her mind. She can't shake the thought that one day the calls might start again. The mystery of the silent caller still haunts her, long after the number was disconnected and the fear never truly left. Conclusion. As the last echoes of the chilling stories fade, it becomes clear that these experiences share something far deeper than just the terror of being alone. They resonate with a universal fear, the vulnerability we all feel when faced with the unknown, when our safety and peace of mind are suddenly threatened by forces we can't see, touch, or control. In each of these stories, from the shadow at the window to the uninvited guest in the basement and the silent caller, the characters were confronted with something much larger than a mere physical threat. They were forced to confront their own sense of security, their understanding of trust, and the very essence of what makes them feel safe in their own homes. One of the most powerful lessons here is the realization of how fragile our sense of safety can be. We often think that the walls around us are impenetrable, that we are insulated from the dangers that lurk just beyond our doorstep. But these stories show us that sometimes it's the things we can't see, the intangible forces, that are the most dangerous. The fear of being watched, the sensation of something or someone lurking just out of sight plays on our primal instincts. It is not just the physical threats we should fear, but the fear of losing control, the fear of not knowing who or what is hiding in the shadows. For Amanda, it wasn't the call itself, nor the fact that someone had accessed her private space. It was the knowledge that a person, someone she didn't even know, could violate her peace of mind with nothing more than a few whispered words on the phone. It was the eerie feeling of being watched, that even when you are alone, you are never truly safe. This realization is deeply unsettling, yet it also serves as a sobering reminder that we are often too complacent in the safety we feel. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there is an underlying message that can empower us all: awareness and vigilance. These characters didn't allow the darkness to consume them completely. They acted. They sought answers, even when the answers were elusive. In doing so, they found the strength to take control over their situations, to make themselves safer, and to reclaim their peace of mind. This is the essence of resilience, Facing your fears, confronting the unknown, and taking steps to protect yourself and your well-being. As listeners and readers, we are also reminded of the importance of trust and the boundaries we set in our own lives. Just as Amanda had to lock her doors and install security cameras, we too must take proactive steps to ensure our safety, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not the event itself, but our helplessness in the face of it. Taking control, no matter how small the action may seem, helps us regain a sense of power over our circumstances. These stories also speak to the inherent need for connection. Amanda, Tyler, and Sarah all found themselves isolated, whether by circumstance or by the fear of what might be lurking just out of sight. In their moments of terror, they reached out to friends, family, and even to the authorities. And in doing so, they found comfort in knowing they were not alone. Human connection is a vital part of our survival, both physically and emotionally. We must remember that even in our most vulnerable moments, there is strength in reaching out, in asking for help, in not allowing ourselves to be consumed by the fear of being alone. Finally, the most important lesson we can take from these terrifying stories is the understanding that fear, in its purest form, is not something to be conquered or ignored. It is something to be acknowledged, respected, and managed. Fear reminds us that we are alive, that we have something worth protecting, and that we have the power to face even the darkest of situations. It is not the absence of fear that makes us strong, but our ability to act in spite of it. So, what can we learn from the shadows, the uninvited guests, and the silent calls? We learn that safety is not guaranteed, that vigilance is crucial, and that in the face of fear, we must take action. We are reminded that while the unknown may always lurk just beyond our understanding, we have the ability to protect ourselves, to seek help when needed, and to reclaim our sense of peace and control. As you reflect on these stories, take a moment to ask yourself, what measures can I take to ensure my own safety, both physically and emotionally? How can I better connect with others when I need help? And how can I remain vigilant in protecting my peace of mind? Fear may always be a part of our lives, but it is how we respond to it that shapes who we are. It is not the fear itself that defines us, but our courage, resilience, and our ability to act when the shadows of uncertainty try to close in around us. Let these stories be a reminder to stay alert, stay connected, and above all, never underestimate the power of a single moment of courage in the face of fear. The unknown may always remain, but we have the strength to face it head on, together.